Yeah, as you mentioned, we had a report published last year on exactly that topic. And I want to give a brief overview of what this report contains. Sorry, first of all, just a few words about the International Transport Forum, though, because I assume that not all of you will be aware. So the International Transport Forum is an intergovernmental organization within the OECD framework. However, we have our separate political nominates, so therefore we also have more member countries than the OECD. Namely, we have 63 member countries and also work with a lot of emerging and transition countries, therefore, and we're quite proud of that compared to what the OECD has in terms of membership. We are the only global platform that covers all modes of transport in the work that we do. We're a think tank for transport policy. That means we work with policymakers, for policymakers. We publish a lot of data and statistics. Also, we publish biannually a transport outlook, where we show different scenarios of where the whole transport world develops in the future in terms of passenger and freight transport demand. We do a lot of work on sharing best practices among our member countries and knowledge sharing, and we facilitate a global dialogue among the transport community. And namely, we have here a so-called annual summit where we bring our transport ministers from our member countries together and all other transport stakeholders. So not only focus on this policy debates, or also that, but obviously it's very relevant to also bring the corporate perspective into all this work. We have therefore started with a so-called corporate partnership board now more than 5 years ago, where we bring corporate partners together that also helps shape our work and direct our work to make it as relevant as possible for the policymakers, and also bring the corporate partners in touch with the policymakers. We're a platform for discussion and pre-negotiation, which is now also quite relevant in the context of the COP, where we have done a lot of work in preparation with our transport ministries. Current focus areas are digitalization, connectivity, safety and security, universal access, and decarbonization. And also, all these themes you can, for example, also find again in our working group report, because these are the themes we always address in the different reports that we are writing. Now, to the more specific work on this report, what was the motivation and background? So basically, the fundamental question was how to prepare for the large-scale deployment of drones from the perspective of a policymaker. As policymakers are very aware that there are public concerns that go well beyond safety that need to be addressed, and that current regulation that is in place is often too restrictive or lags behind, and therefore the development of the drone market is not well going as fast as it could, or is not supported from the policy perspective as much as it could be. Now, a quick definition of our scope. So when we talk about drones, we basically mean everything that flies without a pilot. So it includes all sizes and weights. It includes all design layouts and engine types. It's also irrespective of the altitude at which the vehicle operates. And in the report, we address both freight and passenger drones, or also drones that transport the transport system in terms of carrying out maintenance works for transport infrastructure, for example. What we did was to look at, well, first of all, to justify this fundamental question, why we should even be looking at drones, is to define first the market potential and economic impact of drones. Then we looked at societal impacts and the acceptance of drones, environmental impacts, drone infrastructure in terms of how should it be governed and how should it be funded, and also how should drones be integrated into the existing transport systems. And this is obviously something also very relevant for us, given that we at the ITF look at the transport system as a whole. So we really thought we have to have a very specific focus on this part as well, to see how can the drones actually be integrated in the different transport systems, subsystems, be it in an urban area or in a much larger scale area. Not part of our work, and very explicitly so, are any safety or security questions. So basically, we started our work from the starting point that what would happen to drones if they were safe to fly, or if they, well, assuming drones are safe to fly, whether for freight or passenger transport, they're safe and secure. So what happens next, and what should we be doing as policymakers? Well, when the key findings, very high level for this type of presentation, is that we found that drones can enable very significant economic activity and can deliver substantial economic, social, and environmental benefits, obviously within certain safeguarding measures, but this is definitely the potential that we see for drones, which therefore also justifies looking further into the drones and what policymakers should be doing. We also found that adapting aviation regulations will be insufficient to leverage the benefits of drones. Drones should actually be, depending on the areas where they operate, be treated very differently to what we know from the aviation industry. And we also found that there are substantial knowledge gaps that remain about issues that will raise public concern. And well, the public concern is quite manifold, and we get to this throughout when I now go into more detail about the recommendations that we give to policymakers as a result of the research that we did. Well, first of all, it will be very important that the drone status within the framework of airspace regulation is clarified. And as mentioned, it is probably not enough. It's definitely not enough to rely fully on aviation regulations that are in place. So this has to be done very differently. We also recommend that very specific drone authorities with interdisciplinary competences are created within the public administrations, because we see for the time being very often drones are dealt with within the context of aviation departments and so on. So you have a specific type of people that also works in these aviation departments with a very specific background. And we do think that this is not appropriate actually for drones, especially when you talk also about drones in urban environments and so on, where you should really make sure that you bring different disciplines from urban planners, transport planners, and so on together to make sure that these drones can actually be integrated into existing systems as much as possible. Then there should be clear objectives and priorities for the introduction of drones. Basically, this means that we see from today's point of view that there are several use cases where the benefits of drones are very clear. We also saw this during the COVID pandemic, where the benefits of drones are very clear compared to other means of transport. And it would be advisable to start creating this market more and more, starting from these niche applications, to make sure that there is public acceptance of the use of drones, because this will obviously then be easiest for the public to get used to drones, to understand why there are benefits, why they're being used, and then you can scale up more easily once you have the public on board. Next recommendation is that you should coordinate, or the public policymakers should coordinate very closely with the drone industry. We see that the drone industry is very advanced in terms of technologies that are being trialed, use cases that are being trialed. There's a lot of knowledge within the industry players, and public policymakers should definitely coordinate as much as possible with them to leverage the knowledge that already exists. Next recommendation would be to incorporate drone operations into long-term planning of urban long-term urban planning strategies. A lot of urban areas are currently developing long-term plans, mostly in the context of making sure that they're on track with the decarbonization targets and so forth. And it would be very advisable that when they do now this long-term planning for the urban areas, that they already consider the integration of drones into that urban area planning. And this may be in terms of the transport systems and how drones can offer transport services, freight or passenger, but also in terms of obviously how the infrastructure for drones has to be integrated into the urban space. Further, policymakers should make sure there is a robust unmanned air traffic management system in place. So these UTM systems can fulfill many purposes, and policymakers have to be aware of all the purposes it can fulfill, and then make sure that those are actually also implemented, and the UTM system can actually fulfill all these services that are possible. Could be in terms of services regarding geofencing, data collection, and so forth. Then another point which is very important is about the communication strategy. So there should be one that makes sure that the use of drones and deployment of drones and upscaling of drones addresses all the public concerns, and that this is properly communicated to the public. So this is often, communication strategy is always, there is always something when there's a new technology being brought into the market. But we really think in this context, it should really not be treated as some add-on that is also done if there's time and money left. It should really be a key focus of policymakers and therefore the whole industry, that there is a proper communication strategy, because otherwise there will be many unnecessary hurdles coming from the public, so to say, in terms of drone deployment. And then one last recommendation is that the drone's full life cycle should be assessed in terms of its impact on the environment. And here we're not only talking about CO2 impact, but also the noise impact, impact on wildlife, on energy use, and so on and so on. To be able to have a fair assessment of the drone's impact to the other means of transport, and to really be sure that wherever drones are used, they are actually beneficial also for the environment compared to other means of transport. And these are only the high-level recommendations. We then have for each subject a very specific recommendations and suggestions for policymakers. And I just want to go further into detail for two of them. One section was about how to deal with privacy issues, and one section was about how to deal with noise issues, for example. So we'll talk about these two quite briefly. So what about privacy? There's many things that also public authorities can do or can help drone operators do. For example, they can help drone operators see how concerns can be mitigated, basically already informing them of what concerns there exist from the public, and then help them develop together plans of how these things could be mitigated. There could obviously be no-fly zones or no-fly times be put in place over urban areas or residential areas or other areas, or wherever the concerns may arise. There could also be mandatory registration and remote identification of drones. One could imagine also the public, whoever sees a drone, could check on some websites or on some application what the drone is actually currently doing and where it's flying from. Why is it above my head? What data is it collecting, if it is collecting any data at all, and so on. And again, we're coming back to this communication strategy. There should be proper communication about the drones to foster public acceptance in general, but also for a specific service maybe. So this is the last point on the slide, actually. For a specific service, drone operators or the public authorities could inform the public in the vicinity of the service, why is the drone there and what is it doing. They could also, again, for a specific service, assess the concerns and mitigate them, inform the concerns that arise from people living in a neighborhood. And they should also assess on a use case basis what data a drone is actually allowed to collect. And once the public has confidence that the system works properly, in terms of the public authorities make sure that a drone is very legitimate in there, and they know where to access more information if they have any concerns, then we think much of this public acceptance issue around privacy could actually be resolved. What about noise? Well, we see, for example, that there is there's a big difference between the actual and the perceived noise of drones, which has to do with the high pitchedness of the tone of drones and so on. And there are many technical solutions to it. However, more research is needed to actually address this issue, and also to make sure that this difference between actual noise and perceived noise actually diminishes over time. And again, one way of diminishing is that you communicate to people and explain them what this noise is, because as soon as you know more about the noise, you're more used to the noise, and then the gap between perceived and actual noise actually also diminishes. And then you, as experts in the drone industry, you will know that the actual noise is actually not much louder, especially in an urban area, than it is from normal car traffic. It's actually much lower. You can implement drone noise monitoring and reporting procedures. So this is something where you could use this example where it's already in place, something from private passenger cars, for example, where you monitor and report also pollutant emission values or CO2 emission values, for example. So similar procedures also for drone noise monitoring could be put in place. You could stimulate low noise flight procedures. So there's also techniques how you can make sure that actually noise, once it is drones, once they are in the air, the noise can actually be reduced by making sure the maneuvering is as smooth as possible. You could also define drone operating restrictions between certain times of the day or again in certain areas. And you should support a staged approach to drone integration, again, just for the purpose of making people more used to what is going on and to the new noises that they're hearing, and therefore make sure that the public acceptance increases. So this is already a very brief overview of the content of this report. I just want to mention also how this report came into being. So basically, this was what we call a so-called working group report. So we brought together 30 practitioners and academics from different, well, from more than 14 countries and 3 intergovernmental organizations. Many of them were policymakers. They had backgrounds in land use planning, transport planning, lawyers, aviation backgrounds, and so on. So we really tried to be in this working group as interdisciplinary as possible. And we also had some industry consultation where we talked, for example, to Martinet, Lilium, and Airbus. Yeah, thank you very much. I believe also I saw a few among our authors are in the audience, and I'm very happy to kind of see them cross paths with them again via this conference. Happy for you to add anything to the presentation or to this working group report from now on. Thank you very much.